Even though the Olympics are over, if you're still looking for a feel-good story about the Olympics and the greatest stage for competition, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be covering The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're looking at a book that came out about a decade ago, but I feel like it's really relevant today. We're just finishing up the Olympics. As a matter of fact, if I'd had a little more foresight, I probably would have done this a week or so ago, just so people could have really tapped into this right as we were at the fever pitch of what was a really impressive Olympic Games in Paris. This really is a feel-good story, so much so that it's known in the title from the get-go that the team that we're cheering for is going to win the gold. The subtitle of the book is 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So you know from the beginning that the people in this book that we're reading about are going to win it. But that doesn't change the fact that the path to getting there is incredible, and it's going to be set with the backstage of a really dramatically changing world, especially with the rise of Nazi Germany. And that seems to be one of the most important things that you need to keep in mind when you think about the 1936 Games. Matter of fact, if you know anything about Olympic history, you should know that this is essentially the beginning of the Olympics. It's not the first game. This is more than 30 years into the modern day Olympics, but this is going to be the first time that we actually see a country take the games and use it as an opportunity to showcase their own power and strength. This was something that Hitler was trying to use to essentially validate his rise to power. So there's some very negative elements to that. But it is also going to transform how people use the Olympics, and we've seen it ever since the 1936 Olympics become so much more of an international event, especially since the host country can use it as an opportunity to showcase their own capabilities. Something that really highlights that is the fact that the people that win this Olympics, the boys that come from the University of Washington row team, they are going to come from really difficult backgrounds, because the other really important backdrop to all of this is the Great Depression. And one of the countries that really suffers from the Great Depression is going to be the United States. Actually, Germany did not suffer nearly as much during the Great Depression as the United States did. A lot of people think of post-World War I Germany having this crazy inflation and having all sorts of economic issues. That actually comes before the Great Depression, and that's one of the things that helps sell Hitler and Nazis on the world stage, is the fact that they're appearing to have much more economic success than a lot of the world. So it gives us quite a contrast. You have the Germans being surprisingly economically successful at this time, while you have the Americans, who many of them are coming from very struggling situations, especially the main character in this book. Now, there's 9 people that are going to be in the boat, and all of them deserve attention, and of course the coach himself is going to get a fair amount of attention, but really this book focuses in on one, and I think it's because he really is the embodiment of the struggles of people coming out of the Great Depression, and that's John Rance. John Rance is who the author first consulted about this book, and he's the one that asked the author to write about the 1936 Olympics. Just to give you a brief biography of John Rance, he himself comes from a family that is constantly struggling. His mother dies when he's pretty young. His father remarries. His stepmother does not like him very much. As a matter of fact, on more than one occasion, she insists that he goes and lives elsewhere. And then finally, at some point when he's only like 14 or so, she insists that they all just move except for John, and she makes him stay put. And so he is at an incredible disadvantage, yet he manages to work his way through high school. He does quite well in high school. He manages to get into the University of Washington, which is a very good school. And he is going to join the row team because it doesn't give him a scholarship, but it does guarantee them employment on campus. And that is something that he knows can help him to pay for tuition and pay for room and board. So those are the types of things that are really setting up his desire and his need, essentially, to be on the row team. A few things about rowing in America at this time. It is probably the biggest sport. Football is still developing. Baseball is the larger American pastime, but when it comes to collegiate sports, rowing is a huge deal. Think of how important to this day it is to the Ivy League schools, and for that reason, even the West Coast schools like Washington and California and Stanford, all of them are also putting a lot into creating really good row teams. And for that reason, the Washington row team has a lot of stiff competition, but their new coach has shown some real promise. The big surprise here is not just Washington suddenly becoming a really good team, because they had been improving, but the big surprise is that the team that does well is originally the sophomore team, and clearly a junior varsity team. Except with John Rance and the other athletes in the boat, they proved to be the best. So the bulk of the book is covering their trajectory, which involves much more competition between American universities than it does on the actual international stage. The international stage, there's only a couple races that are important, including the actual gold medal race in which they win. There are a lot of moving pieces when it comes to sorting out who's going to go to the Olympics. As a matter of fact, there's a scene where the Washington team has clearly won their race and they deserve to go, but because money is tight, you have a couple people saying, no, we just can't afford to send anyone. You have to pay for yourself to go to the Olympics. Except, of course, a few Ivy League schools will come and say, well, if you can't afford to go, we gladly can pay for ourselves. The University of Washington manages to get the sums together. They have to go all out. They don't have a big booster club. They can just raise the funds overnight, but because of their ability to tap into just the larger Seattle community, they do manage to get enough interest to pay to get these young men to go to the Olympics. And the title of the book says the rest. They go to the Olympics. That probably doesn't actually happen until about 80% of the way through the book, because, like I said, most of the book is them just becoming the best college team so they can even compete in the Olympics. And then once they do go to the Olympics, they win. It's a very dramatic race. They kind of hold off on purpose. Actually, one of the secret weapons that they have is the coxswain, the person that is telling them to row, how fast to row. He has a really good idea of just how much they can put out in the last second, and he has an idea of how much they can keep in reserve. And so you're going to have this really dramatic race where they're trailing the whole time, and then they, right there at the very end, the coxswain manages to get just enough out of them to win by a very close margin. This is an incredible moment for this specific team. I will say a few things that might undermine that just a little bit is this is not the first gold medal for Americans in rowing. Actually, they had done quite well in the previous several Olympics, but this was the first one for the University of Washington. And it is everything you would expect with an intense celebration, especially back home in the United States. And it is this moment where, despite everything that Hitler had done to try to showcase Germany, it's a real embarrassment for them, especially since the German team had been leading the whole time. But the whole point of the book is to give you this story of perseverance, of struggle, and of making it despite all odds. So who would I recommend this book for? Anyone that wants this feel-good story. I mean, that's the heart of this book, especially if you're looking at John Rance and saying, how did he manage despite the disadvantages that he had? And I will say that it's there. I highly recommend it for anyone that really enjoys books about sports, but more importantly, someone that wants the human element of sports. I would add the caveat that you do need to have some interest in history. It's really hard to fully contextualize an event like this if you're not willing to also consider what was the world of 1936. If you don't understand the importance of the Depression, if you don't understand the importance of the rise of Nazi Germany, none of that is really going to matter to you. And it's also going to completely undermine your ability to appreciate just how much happens in this book. I wouldn't recommend this for anyone that isn't looking for a feel-good story. If you think that that's just a little too simplistic, which I think is perfectly understandable when it comes to sports, and when you're trying to take something that has so many moving parts and something that has so much history and so much controversy at times, like the Olympics, especially the 1936 Olympics, I could understand a reason to resist really wanting to engage with another story like that. But otherwise, I really think that this was one of the better books that I read this year, at least in terms of a real feel-good story, and I would recommend it for anyone that's looking for that. Let me know if you have a difference of opinion. Put that in the comments. But don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.